Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Mia, and the window next to me is Paul. We are the MC of the Honor Forum today. It gives us great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to the Global Forum on the Role of Education in Supporting Students, Exploring Future Pathways. In this Global Forum series, we are honored to have invited a panel of international expert speakers from the UK, Australia, and Hong Kong to discuss and share ideas about the role of higher education in supporting graduates of the future. The Global Forum series comprises 3 forums, which will explore innovative ways to prepare graduates of the future through applied research, practice, and supporting strategies. Today is the first forum, and the upcoming second and third forum will be held in April and June. In today's Forum 1, Supporting Graduates of the Future, Research, Practice, and Strategies, will focus on exploring key research, strategy, and practice in the UK and the Asia-Pacific region to help inform how we might prepare students to achieve and realize their individual aspirations after graduating. We are very excited to meet all of you online who are professionals, educators, and students from different parts of the world. Thank you all for making time in your busy schedule to join us here today, and a very warm welcome to you all. Before the forum officially begins, please join us in welcoming Professor Ricky Kwok, Vice President, Research and Student Development of Hong Kong Metropolitan University, to deliver an opening remark. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Ricky Kwok. Professor Kwok, please.
Okay, thank you. Professor Hayes, Professor Cole, Professor Burgess, our Dean, my colleague Benjamin, distinguished guests, colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to say a few words to open the forum series entitled A Global Forum on the Role of Education in Supporting Students, Exploring Future Pathways. Please bear with me in repeating the title because in my humble opinion, this is a genuinely timely topic and I will explain why in a second. On behalf of the Hong Kong Metropolitan University, I would like to first express my sincere gratitude to our honorable speakers for taking their precious time out in their busy day to share with us their valuable experience, expertise, and insight. Now, let me explain why I think this topic is extremely timely and extremely important. I look forward to learning from you guys because I can see that there are at least 3 major global forces that are kind of, I wouldn't say unprecedented, but kind of very, very new for us in this couple of generations, pushing us educators and also our stakeholders out of our comfort zones. The first force is the COVID-like pandemic that we expect will come back. Right? And the second is the geopolitical conflicts. And the third is AI. Now, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic in higher education has been diverse, profound, and different for each institution and countries, showing in general great efforts in all levels to be resilient and creative as you adapt rapidly to changes. Right, so this is mostly on the teaching side, but students also have to adapt. While universities are primary institutions in teaching and learning, research, technology, engagement with society, central to its role is to prepare students for life and work in a wider world. And the wider world I'm actually implying is also kind of hybrid now. Right? Many companies are now adopting a hybrid working mode, whereby some people will still continue to work from home, and some other people might go to the office, as in the pre-COVID time. So how our students are going to be functioning well in this kind of environment is a question for us. A closely related global issue is the regional instabilities caused by recent geopolitical conflicts. This will possibly disrupt the smooth manifestation of globalization in terms of logistics and human resources mobility. Right? Of course, I won't try to elaborate on that. But again, this poses us serious questions to think about. Finally, we educators must do some serious soul searching and actually researching about our strategies and pedagogy to enable our graduates to work alongside AI, such as the recent very hot topic, ChatGPT and the new Bing search engine. Right? Because believe it or not, or like it or not, right? Our students will live in a world that is totally different from ours. Right? So we as educators are responsible to get them as well prepared as possible. That brings us back to this notion of graduate attribute, a topic which continues to gain importance in both practice and research, is becoming a crucial element in higher education institutions worldwide, have started to re-examine, rethink, and reprioritize their goals, strategic planning, resource allocation, teaching and learning practices, research, and student support services in the post-pandemic era. Let me give you an example. For example, in our university, we are slowly but surely trying to emphasize the co-curricular and extracurricular side of the learning experience, because we believe that the hard skills are not enough for students to function well, to get fulfillment in the new world that they're going to live in. So in our university, we slowly, gradually try to emphasize that component. Now, referring to the Higher Education Academy of UK, graduate attributes refer to the range of core capabilities, qualities, and values that students develop as a result of their learning and other experiences at university, enabling them to become not only competent employees, but also active community members, global citizens, and lifelong learners. Now, my question for this statement is that, how do you define competent employees? How do you define active community members? And how do you define global citizen? And how do you define lifelong learners? These are all crucial questions. Otherwise, this will just be empty talk, right? In this collaborative global forum series, we are very honored to have joined hands with our co-organizer, Nottingham Trent University, and a number of experts from around the world who are passionate educators making significant contributions to the future of the field by bringing together global educators for discussion on innovative ways to prepare graduates of the future through practice, applied research, and supporting strategies. The shared vision will help us understand the latest challenges, expand our understanding of what graduate readiness really means and requires, and to provide us with insights, suggestions, and directions for the future. We look forward to learning from our distinguished speakers whose professional exchanges and collective practice wisdom will continue to promote innovation and move the shared vision forward to help us all better support the graduates of the future. Lastly, before I close, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizing committee of this collaborative global forum series, including our Hong Kong MU colleagues and LEPACE, Office for Advancement of Learning and Teaching, Student Affairs Office, and last but not least, the Trent Institute for Learning and Teaching, supporting learning for employability practice and scholarship group of Nottingham Trent University. Without all your tireless efforts, hard work, and dedication, the forum series simply would not have been possible. I wish the Global Forum series a great success, and I'm sure it will. And all participants an invigorating and fruitful experience as you find inspiration, spark creativity, and engage with the wisdom and experience of all those be with us in this series. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Professor Kwok. Now let's put our hands together to invite Professor Niall Hayes, Executive Dean for Graduate Outcomes of Northern Trent University, to deliver an opening remark. Professor Hayes, please.
Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to also be able to welcome you all today. My name is Professor Niall Hayes and I am the Executive Dean for Graduate Outcomes here at Nottingham Trent University. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I'm absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to make some opening remarks on behalf of us all at Nottingham Trent University. First, our thanks to Professor Ricky Kwok and everyone at Hong Kong Metropolitan University, who I know have worked incredibly hard to pull this important series together. It's our pleasure to be working in partnership with Hong Kong Metropolitan University, and we are very much looking forward to developing this relationship further in the future as we explore how we can better support students globally for a complex future world. We also thank those colleagues from other institutions joining us today, and we hope that this will be just the start of many discussions in this space. I would also like to thank Dr. Doug Cole for his leadership in this area. I'm sure you'll enjoy and benefit from his talk at this conference as we do here at Nottingham Trent University. I hope everyone enjoys the speakers that follow in today's session and in the following sessions in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hayes. As a way to express our gratitude and appreciation for our speaker's generous support, may I now invite Dr. Benjamin Chen Tat-Yuen, Dean of Hong Kong Metropolitan University, Lee Ka-shing School of Professional and Continuing Education, to present certificates of appreciation to our honorable speakers. May I first invite Dr. Chan to present a certificate of appreciation to Dr. Doug Cole, Associate Director of Academic Employability Services, Nottingham Trent University, UK. Would Dr. Chan and Dr. Cole please look at the camera while we take a screenshot? Thank you. Next, may Dr. Chan please present a certificate of appreciation to Professor John Burgess, Professor of Centre for Organizational Change and Agility, Torrens University, Australia. Would Dr. Chan and Professor Burgess please look at the camera while we capture this moment? Thank you so much, everyone. Would Dr. Chan and Professor Burgess please stay? To mark this memorable event, we'll take a virtual group photo together. May we invite Professor Ricky Kwok Yu Kwong, Dr. Doug Cole, Dr. Kathleen Jim, Chair of Organizing Committee, to join this virtual group photo taking. Now, will everyone please position yourself squarely in the frame and look directly at the camera for a few seconds. Ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. That's perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, let's welcome the Chair of the Forum Organizing Committee, Dr. Kathleen Jim, Associate Head of the Division of Health and Science at Lee Ka-shing School of Professional and Continuing Education, Hong Kong Metropolitan University, to set the theme of the forum by giving us a welcoming message. Dr. Jim, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this Global Forum series. I'm very pleased to meet you all in this virtual space today. A very warm welcome to everyone. We have over 100 local and overseas registrants signing up for today's forum, and I've generated a word cloud to show us the range of roles played by our participants. So we have participants who are in the position of formulating policy recommendations and strategies. Some of us play a more frontline role, having everyday interactions with students through teaching, learning, and support services. Others have decisions to make about curriculum development and quality assurance. We also have participants working in industry organizations, employment advice, and career coaching. So what is this telling us? The diversity of our audience group tells us that supporting students is indeed a responsibility that's shared by all of us, with each and every one of us having our unique role to play in affecting the academic, professional, and personal aspects of the development journey of our students. So why this Global Forum series? The topic of preparing students for the future has received a great deal of attention in recent years. And as Professor Kwok mentioned earlier, this is partly to do with the rapid technological change, digitization, and globalization that are radically changing the way we work and live. Against this backdrop, 3 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic shocked the world, and since it has disrupted the discourses and practices in higher education institutions worldwide more than ever. Working and living in such a rapidly changing environment, like my fellow educators, I often find myself coming across information or being involved in meetings and conversations that center around the following questions. What is expected of graduates in the 21st century? What is meant by graduate readiness? Do we share the same understanding and perspective? How well equipped are graduates to enter the workplace, navigate life's challenges, and adapt and grow in an uncertain future? To what extent do our policies and practices help students to develop the necessary knowledge, skills, beliefs, values, qualities, and characteristics? How do we know what we do actually works? And altogether, this leads us to reflect on the question, what is the purpose of higher education? And how can we continue to step up to nurture our students so that they become more well-rounded, lifelong and self-directed learners to face the future? In light of this, we have gathered a group of passionate educators to help us create space and time that allows us to reflect on how we can better support our students to build a life beyond a degree. There are 3 forums in this series. So in today's forum, we'll have Dr. Ducko and Professor John Burgess helping us to reflect on our understanding of graduate attributes, work readiness, and employability, and to share about the strategic issues and challenges in the UK and the Asia Pacific. In Forum 2, we'll explore a number of practical tools and tips to help us facilitate graduate readiness, including pedagogy, assessment, and career counseling. We've invited Ms. Carla Campbell, Ms. Cassie White, and Dr. Ian Wilson from Nottingham Trent University, and Dr. Lanzi Pan from Hong Kong Shuyan University to share their experiences with us. The last forum will focus on looking at solutions to practical problems related to graduate readiness through conducting applied research. We'll have Dr. Cecilia Chan from the University of Hong Kong to share about her innovation research in the accreditation, implementation, and evaluation of holistic competencies and how they can be embedded into a curriculum. This will be followed by Professor Julie Hume from Nottingham Trent University, who will share about her research work in identity in relation to student motivation and employability, and how this can be embedded into teaching and learning. Together with our speakers and participants, we aim to contribute to the ongoing global dialogue in this area. We also wish to find a balanced focus on a number of important and interconnected topics that help us better prepare our students to engage effectively with new experiences, build resilience, and thrive in a changing future. With this, we'd also like to hear your thoughts and ideas. And so please do share them with us at any point during the webinar using the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. This will be picked up by our colleagues who will either answer them immediately or follow up with an email later. Now, before we kickstart the forum series, I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who has supported us in planning and organizing this series, including our co-organizer, the Trent Institute for Learning and Teaching, Practice and Scholarship Group of Nottingham Trent University. Our special thanks goes to Dr. Ducko, who is also the co-chair of our organizing committee and one of our keynote speakers today. Next, we'd like to thank all of our invited speakers, because without your passion and generous support, we simply wouldn't have been able to put this forum series together. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm when we first approached you about the idea. I'd like to thank our organizing committee, including our advisory chairs, for supporting our ideas and beliefs and providing us with your guidance along the way. Also, our committee members and supporting staff. We couldn't have pulled off this forum series without everyone's dedication and hard work over the past few months. It really hasn't been easy for us to work with everyone remotely across different campuses and different time zones. And so a very massive thank you for bringing our idea into reality. Okay, now, so I won't take too much of your time. I hope that you all enjoyed the exciting speakers to come as the forum series inspires ideas, exchange and collaboration around the ways that we can better prepare our students for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jim. Now I'm sure everyone is excited and looking forward to learn from our distinguished speakers in the field of employment. So on behalf of the organizing committee, let me invite the first keynote speaker of this forum section, Dr. Doug Cole, Associate Director, Academic Employability Services, Nottingham Trent University, UK. Dr. Doug Cole has 15 years experience in leading learning and teaching in higher education. Prior to this, having spent over a decade in industry working with a range of sports organizations in the UK, Beijing, Hong Kong, and Bangkok. Dr. Cole is currently Associate Director, Academic Employability Services at Nottingham Trent University. Having spent 3 years previously with the Higher Education Academy UK, Dr. Cole focused on developing strategic approaches to learning for employability and students' success with institutions across UK and globally. He is also a Senior Fellow of the Higher Education Academy and an Honorary Fellow of the Institute of Enterprise and Entrepreneurs. In 2012, Dr. Cole developed the concept of a national framework and guide for embedding employability in the curriculum to support all institutions in developing graduates with the qualities and capabilities that are vital for success, not only in securing employment, but also for life more broadly. In 2013, Dr. Cole co-authored the Higher Education Academy publication, Defining and Developing Your Approach to Employability, a framework for higher education institutions. Later in 2019, Dr. Cole co-authored The Language of Employability, a book chapter in education for Employability Volume 1, published by Brill in Australia. So with a big round of applause, let's invite Dr. Doug Cole to present on what dimensions for learning really matter for future graduates: research, strategy, and practice. Dr. Cole, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bear with me while I just share my screen. So can you all see my slides now?
It's perfect, Doug.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, absolutely delighted to be able to join you all today, and thanks so much to Professor Ricky Kwok and all esteemed colleagues at Hong Kong Metropolitan University and colleagues joining us, again from around the world. Delighted to have this chance to talk with you all. We are on strict time limit, so I will jump straight into it without any further ado. So what my role is Associate Director Academic at Nottingham Trent University, and what I wanted to have the chance to do share today is it really kind of links into what Professor Ricky Kwok said at the beginning about really defining what matters, what aspects of learning are really important moving forwards, and I would argue have been important for a long time, but often is unrecognised. And so I'm keen to be able to share some of this thinking with you as we move forwards. And this is informed by my own personal research and from my own practice working with institutions around the UK. I'm not going to give you my life story, but I thought this was quite an interesting picture to kind of show you. These are all the places I've worked. And I don't know if any of my colleagues in Hong Kong can recognize any of those pictures, but there's pictures in there from Hong Kong and Beijing and other places I've worked. And I really wanted to highlight this in terms of what learning really mattered for me. And obviously we all are informed by our experiences in life and shaped by those things. So when I was studying, what really made that difference for me in terms of going on into this career and working in many different places? And I would say in 1993, as a graduate in sports science, I never had any clue I would be here talking to you all this morning about these topics. So the future was uncertain then, and the future has always been uncertain. We're on this I'm sure you will all have your own stories of different roles, different careers that you've had, and I think that's something important to bear in mind in terms of thinking about what we are kind of focused on in terms of supporting students in terms of their learning, what areas of learning really matter. And I would argue at university, some of the most important experiences in shaping who I've become today were beyond the curriculum, and they were in experiences I worked kind of testing elite basketball players as part of a project externally and traveling around and meeting those people, those experiences of working in a team. So that's just again, so whilst technology is changing and the world is changing, let's not forget the world has always been changing. So my particular interests are around research to practice. How do we take and particularly the research around employability and learning that supports employability, and how do we translate that into practice? And particularly I'm interested in strategic approaches. So how do we do this at scale? So how do we do this across all courses or all programs to benefit all students? So fundamentally, my interest is in learning and teaching, because I believe that that's what we're all that's kind of the core business of all institutions as educators. That's really what we're about, alongside obviously research and other things too. Just to throw out in terms of this broader context, in terms of what's shaping, I suppose, this agenda at the moment and the dominant narrative that we're experiencing in the UK, and I've not just experienced this in the UK, I've also experienced, this kind of language and thinking in other parts of the world, in the Middle East, in China, in other places, that education plus skills equals job success. It's kind of this simple linear kind of equation that kind of we hear about, that we just give the students skills and that will be enough. And actually my argument is I'm not sure that is enough. I'm not sure skills properly captures the nuances of learning and types of learning that we should be focusing on as educators, and I'll come on to explain that further. So, and my argument is, are we preparing students for a job, or are we preparing them for life more broadly, where a job is part of life? So I think all of us can kind of recognize as educators that we're supporting we're really working to develop the student as a person, and how they then apply that learning in their own lives, not just in the workplace, but in life more broadly, I would argue. So I think that hopefully will shape kind of my angle of where I'm coming from in terms of what I'm saying here. A big focus for me is a real interest I have, as you saw by the book chapter I wrote a while ago, was I have a real interest in language, and particularly working with colleagues around the world, and even working with colleagues in our own countries. It's very evident we're often not speaking the same language. So we're quite often using words, and there's assumptions around what these words mean. And fundamentally, if you want to try and get consistency, or you want to support all students, there needs to be some kind of mutual understanding. So I'll go back to Professor Ricky Kwok's comments at the start, which really were music to my ears, which is we need to define what we're working towards from the outset, in my humble opinion. So what does employability mean? What skills do we mean? What attributes are we talking about? What does student success mean? If we don't define these areas first, one, how do we know, how are we designing our programs? And secondly, how are students understanding what's important, what aspects of learning they should be investing in? Because we can't give students and teach all of these areas to students. Students have to be active participants in this learning process. So they have to understand the why. And that's what we're coming on to later. And I think one of the issues that we face in the UK quite strongly, and I know in Australia too, is the power of the metrics and the league tables that put pressure on universities. And in fact, I believe in Australia that courses, in terms of funding for courses from government, that there is a specific requirement that they are preparing students for the world of work. My argument is not to go counter to that, but my argument is that we should be preparing people for the future more broadly, and work is a part of that experience. We're developing people. So in terms of kind of thinking about where the sector now is, where is higher education now, and the types of activities in practice, and some of the later sessions in the forum will delve much more into that, and we're talking more at the kind of strategy level here, but then ultimately how does that inform practice? I would hope that many of those activities that would kind of be familiar with colleagues in the room, and there's nothing new or groundbreaking in there. These are all good practice examples of pedagogies and activities, learning and teaching activities that we believe are important to prepare the students for the future. But my question there is, what is the shared point of reference that underpins all of that work? Are we using the research to inform our practice at scale with all students? And my argument is that we often think activity before outcome. So we say we're doing a placement, or they're getting work experience, but what for? What's the purpose of that experience? What does that actually develop in terms of learning with the students? So I think we need to be thinking about, for me, outcome first, brings up the work of Biggs and Tang around constructive alignment and those kinds of principles. So we actually have this understanding then of what all of these activities do and how that cumulatively adds up, and what does that develop in our students. And my question more, and for those colleagues in countries where this is a serious factor, is, are we looking beyond the numbers? Fundamentally, we're talking about developing people. And my first conversations with Dr. Chim in this space were where they were and Professor Benjamin as well, around wellness and socio-emotional learning and well-being, meant that side of things. It wasn't particularly around employment, but when we discussed what aspects of learning were important in both our areas of work, we realized that we were talking about the same thing. Hence this series is really born through those conversations. This is a little snapshot of the kind of some research that I conducted as part of my PhD back in 2019 with a sample of undergraduate sports programs, sports degrees. So with looking at talking to academics, talking to leaders, talking to students, and asking them the direct question: what does employability mean to you? What is it that you think is, define it? And the initial words out of their mouth, and even though this was conducted a number of years ago, this research is anecdotally kind of supported on a daily basis. If I do a presentation and I talk to colleagues about what employability means to them, the first words out of their mouth is skills. It's about gaining skills, and it's about getting a job, or it's about employment. And my argument is that and then it doesn't necessarily go any deeper than that. It doesn't get any more specific. It remains vague and ambiguous. Well, how do we tackle that in practice? We have to unpack that and define it. So for me, that this is generally there's a narrow interpretation of employability, often confused with employment around the world. And these understandings are often not informed by research or by the academic research. They're informed by other things, whether it's the media, the government, working with colleagues, this kind of social constructivism view of how this language is understood. But the work in practice for me is often disconnected from the literature and what the body of work says in the literature, and also the core purpose of learning and teaching. It's almost seen as a siloed area of work. Well, that's the career service. They get people jobs. Actually, we're here for learning and teaching. And my argument is that those are false divides, and we need to break down those barriers and help integrate this kind of thinking into a more holistic view of learning and teaching across an institution. So the question is so going back to that opening comments, what learning really matters? Is it knowledge? Is it skills? Those things are kind of almost, I would argue, kind of guaranteed. There were certain things they will definitely are going to appear. Any degree program, any course is going to be designed with those things in mind. But there's questions to ask of ourselves: how are we actually seeking to develop and facilitate and nurture the attitude, values, behaviors? And often that obviously that I'm not saying that those are things that we can teach, but those are certainly things that we can talk about. We can raise awareness of important aspects, because my argument is that in combination, these are all important in combination, and there's no priority here in terms of one is more important than the other, particularly with the advent of technology, where in terms of knowledge and in terms of AI at the moment, do we have to memorize and remember all these things when you can put a question in a computer and it can now write a book for us? It can write an essay for us. It can do all of these things. So it just, again, it highlights to me the importance of things beyond knowledge. How do we really enhance learning as people? This is a concept which I think is useful to consider in this space. That I think when it comes to kind of addressing this work in practice at scale with academics, I think it's important to realize that academics are under pressure. They have limited time. The curriculum knowledge sits at the heart of those courses, and that you can't just fit lots of extra things into the curriculum. You can't just do lots of extra activities. We appreciate there isn't the time. It's not necessarily possible to do. So this concept of life-wide learning, I think, is a really useful one, particularly given the pandemic and how we've all been learning as individuals through living through a pandemic and still living through a pandemic now. So if that hasn't developed people's resilience or that self-efficacy and self-belief, I don't know what will. So I think it's really important, and it creates this more holistic view of learning beyond the classroom. So life-wide learning is about learning in multiple spaces in our lives at the same time. So learning through work, being relationships, family and friends, hobbies, sport, volunteering, part-time work. All of these things are opportunities to learn. And what we have the opportunity in obviously we can't control that, but within a university, through personal tutoring, through seminars, through assignments, we have the opportunity to ask questions of the students. We can anchor that create this anchor point where we can ask questions to get them drawing on these experiences, to harness the value of those experiences, to make those experiences explicit. Students often struggle to articulate the transferability of their learning from one space to another. And I think that this is an opportunity here to kind of get them to recognize the value of what they bring with them beyond grades too. So whilst you might not have certain students might not have got great grades coming into university, they may well have a wealth of other experiences and have strengths in other areas. And we need to be recognizing that and not just allowing them to start from a deficit position where they think that they're behind. So what does the research tell us in terms of employability and learning that supports employability? There are a number of definitions and models out there. There has been for over 10 years. We will never all agree on a single model, and I'm not suggesting that we should. But I am suggesting that as academics, research to practice, research-informed practice should be part of how we think about these things and how we prepare students for the future. So there's a body of research that defines what it means and definitions, but there's also then a body of work that describes how we do it. So in practice, you have colleagues writing about how they applied certain activities and thinking with business management students or sports management students or history students. And it's small samples rather than thinking about how do we do something that actually can work, that's flexible enough to work for all students across all subjects. So there's very little in terms of in the research that this praxis between those two first points. What do we think it is and how do we do it in practice? What informs what we're doing? And there's very little in that space. And that's the space I've been been working in over the last 10 years. This is a definition that we've I think, to be honest with you, and Cassie will probably be smiling here, a colleague that I work with at NTU, this could change every day. This could really change every day. And I often avoid trying to define employability because I think employability is defined ultimately at the individual level. What is it that's going to make you employable? But there is learning that should, more broadly should be part of that. But for me, it is this lifelong and life-wide process. It's always changing. Hence, there isn't a single metric that captures employability. Despite what the metric, the media and the newspapers and websites might tell you, their employability league tables, they are not measuring employability. They're either measuring static snapshots of employment or they're measuring which university graduates do employers like the most. That's not employability when you look at the definitions. So whilst those things are important and they're not going away, that we need to understand the difference between the two. But fundamentally, for me, it's about not only what we know and what we can do, but it's also about who we are as people. So building this, our learning across multiple spaces in order to become this kind of equip us for the future and success more broadly. So on the right there is just a few examples of a number of models. So Dacre, Paul and Saul, Fugate et al. And Tomlinson, and also work by William Donald as well around graduate capitals. So these models on the right basically have tried to define the aspects, the elements of learning that are important to what we call employability over here. As I said, this doesn't necessarily always connect in terms of practice in the UK. This is a body of work that often seems, like I said, disconnected. But they will argue, these authors, that in combination, all of those elements within those models are important. So it's about a combination of areas of learning. And we've all got experience, I think, of graduates who maybe first class top students who academically achieve top grades, but who may not necessarily have the emotional intelligence or the compassion or the empathy to be able to work with others effectively. So again, it highlights the importance of a combination of learning. And what I tried to do in my PhD was translate that, was to define that in a different way. And I wanted to define it in terms of learning. So specifically, I developed this dimensions for learning taxonomy, and I deliberately wanted to avoid certain words. I didn't want to talk about skills. I didn't want to talk about job or career, because I wanted to engage with academics across all subject areas. And I wanted to put it in a language that I would hope would resonate and engage people. And if you're going to do strategic work at scale, we need to engage and bring stakeholders with us. So that's based on some of the work that I did in my PhD. But then coming into NTU, I was keen to kind of apply that work further and evolve that thinking further and build on those experiences I've had throughout my career. And I wanted to articulate employability in a slightly different way. I wanted to articulate it as more of this, and highlight the layers, the complexity to it. I wanted to show that this is about a combination of things. And if something's missing, it's very obvious there's something missing. So we developed this model. Where we're using it, so deliberately thinking about at the start reflective practice that underpins all of this and really creating effective reflective practitioners, but then thinking about the notion of lifelong and life-wide learning. How are we explaining this to our students? As this unpacks at the heart of this learning, thinking about resilience and self-efficacy. I think we could argue these areas of learning are important for all of us today in a complex and challenging world. And then these other areas, this isn't meant to be rocket science or brand new thinking. It's just wrapping these ideas together in a different way. And it's to reassure you that much of this work is already happening. So this will already be there, but it also starts to introduce other things to get us thinking. How are we developing student, career, professional identity? What does that mean in our subject area? What kind of interpersonal and intrapersonal learning really matters for our students? So this creates a point of reference, a framework, if you like, for curriculum design. So going from this model is this taxonomy is informed by the models I showed you previously, but it's kind of, we're now going through to, right, that looks nice, but how do we actually do this in practice? So what we do is we've created this scaffolding that can be used as a tool for curriculum design at the course or program level. So at the course or program level, you define what do these areas look like? What does interpersonal, intrapersonal mean for history students or math students or computer science students? What do these things mean? So there's a sense of ownership, and it's not a one size fits all. It's about the course, the program, shaping what this looks like at their level, but understanding that all of these areas are important in combination. So it's this flexible model that gives structure, but that's based on principles. And ultimately then, once the course or the program has created a picture, every single student is able to then reflect on that and contextualize it and personalize it. What does it mean to me? What do those things mean to me as a mature student, as an international student, whatever their backgrounds? There's a process here, there's a methodology around this framework that we've developed at NTU, and which we're currently testing. And this is new. So I'm not saying this is what we're doing across the board at NTU. This is new thinking. This is building on the excellent work we've been doing up to date, and this is building for the future. So this is kind of, like I said, and we're just starting to test some of this work now. I'd appreciate you won't be able to see the words on there. Don't worry. We will make these slides available to colleagues. But again, I wanted to show you research to practice. So what are we doing with that taxonomy? How are we using that with colleagues at the course level? So this is a simple course level employability heat map tool we've developed. Is really this long-term development tool. And what we've done is across the top, across the columns going down, is each of the areas that I just showed you in the model. So we've mapped each of those areas across the top. And three of the columns, we've asked the academics to think specifically around, in your subject, what's really important. And I think in this was one for engineering. They talked about the importance of being innovative, of critical thinking, and for communication. So we added those in first. Then down the very first column on the left, we added all the modules that they're studying at levels 4, 5, and 6 across their 3 years of study. And then what we did was, one column at a time, we mapped, well, where do these things exist? Where is innovation? How do we try to develop innovation? And we very simply did this exercise. Red means there's nothing in there. We're not talking about it in this module. Amber means there's a little bit, but maybe it's implicit. And green means we're fairly confident there's something in there. It's explicit. The students will understand it may be being assessed. And we just take this kind of overall, rather simplistic, but simple snapshot of a health check for our course and what learning really matters. And as you can see there in the columns, you can then see how much green is there. Is there enough green? It can't all be green. Red is fine, but the answer is, the question is there enough green? Is there enough amber? And it prompts so many good questions with colleagues. And we've worked with course leaders initially and maybe one or two other colleagues to shape this, and then they share it with colleagues. So this is a new tool that we're testing. It takes, in practice, 2 hours to complete, 1.5, 2 hours. This is not weeks and weeks, but based on this work, we can then devise an action plan with specific activities that the program team can then focus on in terms of their pedagogy and learning and teaching and the curriculum design, the seminar activities they design over the coming year. And then you think about, how will we know we've improved in that space? So that we suggest they pick one area to focus on. Maybe they focus on resilience. Right, we're going to focus for the year on resilience. How do we nurture and enhance resilience? And how will we know at the end of the year we've improved the students' resilience? So this gives you a flavour for the kind of work we're doing in this space, to highlight areas of learning that matter and to really define it and think, where are these? I've got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of rattle through. We're nearly there. So there's this whole process that we're currently working through. This is based on some work that I mentioned in 2013 for the Higher Education Academy. So there is a methodology and a process for working with course teams in this space. The work of constructive alignment definitely has value here to this agenda, because it starts us off with thinking, what are the outcomes we want to achieve? What learning outcomes do we need, and what kind of students are we looking to develop? And then we think about the learning and teaching activities that are going to kind of deliver that, enable that for us. So the final stage that I wanted to share with in terms of practice is that taxonomy for me is something that I've published and shared in a journal article with a colleague. So there's that kind of conceptual underpinning, but actually what are we going to talk about to students? How are we actually going to share this with students? And so we've translated that again into a more simplistic framework, and this is what we've called the Developing with NTU framework. And what we wanted to do was create a simplistic framework that could be adopted, contextualized and used in principle by any department or any service. And you'll see in a moment when I show you the words in it, that it's very neutral. But it allows you to, basically what happens is it provides kind of some simple lenses to focus on, to say to these students, all these lenses are important in combination. And when you open the door of each of the lenses, behind them is the learning that was included in the taxonomy I just showed you. So this is something we're currently weaving into our work. And I know that Carla and Cassie potentially are going to reference this in the second forum, so I won't go into too much details. But broadly, this is our Developing with NTU framework, and these 4 simple lenses with the student very much at the center of this, but also the community NTU around them that can support them. So fundamentally, if you unpack any of these lenses, it will lead you into areas of learning such as resilience, flexibility, emotional intelligence, self-efficacy, knowledge, etc. Get it, careers education, career development learning. What do employers need? And that's obviously a lot of this work is informed by kind of not only what do employers need now, what do they tell us they need now, but this more sustainable view of learning. What are the sustainable outcomes of learning that have always stood the test of time, that have been important over decades? And that is about how we work with other people. It is that self-belief, it is that passion, our communication. All of those things aren't going to date. Technical skills will always change, but the kind of people we need to be, there's some common, more sustainable, more stable ground there. So what we've actually done using that framework, again, we've now created a specific award that wraps all of that up, that an individual student can sign up to and can reflect on their learning across those areas that we've specified at that course level. And what we're finding is we're starting to introduce this as an award that can be embedded in the curriculum, can be embedded in a particular module. And we're literally just in the process of testing this with a number of courses. For example, with our psychology course, we have 900 students in each year group. And in one of the modules, they will all be engaging with this award as part of the curriculum, as part of the assessment. So rather than it being extracurricular, we're really trying to make this inescapable. How do we get students to recognize this learning is important across the space? So, and again, I won't go into more detail because this may be something that is followed up in future sessions. I wanted to end with this slide really, which for me kind of captures a lot of what I've been talking about today, that language is so important. And if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, this was developed by Professor Norman Jackson and colleagues in the Centre of Excellence for Learning and Teaching. They weren't employability people. They were learning and teaching people, and they were asked, what is important for the future? And if you look at the words on there, ethics, morals, beliefs, values, skills, but they also talk about attitude and talk about kind of this ability, the need to be able to collaborate. But isn't that so interesting? Learning for a complex world. It was already complex in 2008. 2023, it's still complex. So whilst there's always change, I think the text on the right, the quote from Hill, I think is really useful. And I think if we think about learning in this space, we're not just thinking about learning for a job. We're thinking about learning that underpins retention, attainment, progression, mental health, well-being and sustainability. We're actually looking at learning that can support more integrated approaches to education in the future. And I think we need to recognize those synergies, break down silos across teams and work together, hopefully to support students for the future. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koh, for the really inspiring and enlightening talk. Our next keynote speaker of the day is Professor John Burgess, Professor of Management at the Centre of Organisational Change and Agility of Torrens University, Australia. Professor John Burgess is currently the Professor of Management at the Centre of Organisational Change and Agility of Torrens University, Australia. His research interests include new forms of work, labour regulations, precarious employment, and changing workforce composition. He has secured research fundings to examine skill shortages and employee retention in South Australia local government sector. In addition, Professor Burgess currently supervises PhD students for research in multiple areas, namely the career development in the Australian firm industry, leadership development in the Indian IT sector, the retention of trained teachers in Western Australia school sector, and the barriers to women transitioning from the informal to formal jobs sectors in rural Java, Indonesia. Professor Burgess' recent publication on gig work can be found in the International Journal of Human Resource Management and Journal of Industrial Relations. In 2022, he also edited a book titled A Field Guide to Managing Diversity, Equality, and Inclusions in Organizations by Edward Elgar Publishing. Professor Burgess is going to talk about graduate work readiness challenges in Asia Pacific today. With his previous experience and ongoing research findings, I'm sure we will learn a lot from Professor Burgess' insights. So without further ado, give the floor to Professor Burgess. Professor Burgess, please.
Hello, good evening, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the organisers for their invitation and for organising this particular seminar. I think at the outset, I must say that I'm not an educator or linked to the education faculty. My research is linked mainly about work and employment and human resource development. And I co-edited a book on graduate work readiness in the Asia Pacific in about 2019. And I'll talk about reflect on some of the findings from that particular publication. And it's really about identifying the problems, what's been tried to address employability, and also to recognise, as Doug says, that it means different things in different locations. And also it's manifested through different processes and as a result of different types of problems. My interest is really around the transitional process within the labour market, how you go from one state to another. That is, how you go from university to a job and what the transition involves. And in the past, I've done transitional examination of unemployment to jobs, and this is a major problem throughout the world, and also other transitional problems which exist in particular circumstances. For example, the re-entry of carers from full-time care to the workforce, and the transition from those who leave military employment into civilian employment. So these particular transitional problems are fairly widespread and have serious consequences for individuals and communities. And the same applies to examining what happens in the transition from universities to the labour market. The first problem is that there's profound change within the labour market, and there's major, I guess, geopolitical change occurring. We're confronted with major climate change, which has implications for industry and employment. And sorry, the slides are moving a bit faster than my presentation. And transitioning from graduation to work is becoming a bigger problem in light of the serious changes structurally which are occurring throughout the economy in terms of what's being performed in jobs, the type of skills being required, the application of technology, and also the new types of jobs which are being generated and the old jobs which are being displaced. So this is an ongoing process, and it's captured in the term the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which talks about moving on from ICT changes to biotechnological changes, big data, automation, robotics, etc. And behind these mega changes, really in the context of our particular seminar, is it does question the nature of a university education and the structure of faculties and programs, and how can universities which were maybe built on a system which maybe developed in the last century or the century before cope with a particular labour market which is now more globalised, subject to very systemic and profound structural changes. And also behind this is another big issue, is the big flows of students and workers within our region. And pre-COVID, there were 1 million students within the region who were studying elsewhere. And so to what extent is this linked to the problem of graduate work readiness? So can we move on to the next slide? So mega forces operating within the ASEAN region will greatly influence the future supply and demand and the mobility of professionals. And one of the big challenges is the demographics, the ageing of the workforce. Again, within the last few years, I co-edited a book on meeting the challenges of an ageing population within the Asia Pacific. And of course, what's happening is that some countries are ageing very rapidly, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand. Others have fairly youthful populations. For example, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand. So they can look forward to some demographic dividend. And so one of the issues is how to account for the loss of those experienced workers, especially the baby boomers, within the context where the population is actually diminishing. But as I said, the demographics are diverse, and there's different pressures on filling the particular skill gaps which are arising. One means of filling the skill gap is to extend retirement and to offer points of access for older workers to be retained within the workforce. And of course, another common remedy is to rely on immigration to fill your gaps. The other issue which is occurring throughout the region is that there are increasing investments in secondary and tertiary education. the uptake in secondary and tertiary education across the region is increasing. And so there's more and more, a bigger cohort of ASEAN citizens with both vocational, college and university education. And in addition, more students from Asian countries are seeking an international education in North America, Europe, and in Australia, New Zealand. So these are the sort of background factors which are all entangled within this graduate work readiness discussion. Can we move on to the next slide? So the World Economic Forum says in 2015 that around 60% of children entering primary school may work in jobs that do not exist at the moment. So how can you plan your education system, especially your tertiary education system, for the jobs which you do not know do exist, will exist in the future? On top of that, we've had major disruptions to working and labour markets, clearly through the pandemic, but also through major climatic disruptions, flooding, fires, earthquakes, etc., natural disasters. And this has led to disruption of education and training and the destruction of infrastructure. So these particular problems add to what we're discussing this evening. Can we move on? So the human capital model supports investment in training and education, and the evidence suggests that the more you invest, the more you receive in your returns. And it's a particular model which justifies both personal and community investment in training and education across the 3 tiers, and in fact 4 tiers towards adult education. And so, and as I said, we're seeing increasing investment in education right across the region. But alongside this increased investment in education, especially higher education, there's the emerging problem of graduate unemployment and underemployment. Can we move on to the next slide? So the Human Capital Index for 130 countries, and I think this is from the World Economic Forum. So in the 15 to 24 age group, those who are graduating from university or from vocational colleges, the particular metric scores are that on average across countries, there's only a leveraging of around 2/3 of human capital potential. So there's a disconnect between learning and employment. There's this major transitional problem. And this disconnect may be manifest by the fact that maybe graduates have degrees or jobs which do not have an employment demand, or they have particular skills which are not required by employers, or they lack particular skills and attributes, the type of attributes which Doug discussed in the previous presentation, which maybe employers perceive that graduates do not possess. So can we move on? So graduate work readiness, as already said by Doug in the previous presentation, there are many terms which cover the same sort of thing. And in our particular collection around graduate work readiness, when we looked at the contributions from the different countries, many of them were really talking about different things and different types of problems which were present, but they all contributed to this transitional problem. How to move from your completion of your program to actually getting a job. And the manifestations of this were unemployed graduates, underemployed graduates, graduates working in multiple jobs which didn't require a university education, or potentially graduates going on to seek further qualifications and credentials, which maybe were in areas which weren't linked to their primary degree. So work readiness suggests that graduation in itself is a sufficient but not necessary condition to enter into employment. And of course, this is what Doug's previous presentation emphasised, that you need more than the degree. There are various attributes and competencies, soft skills, etc., which may be required by employers in order to land a job. So the issue is, where are these particular attributes to be found? Are they embodied in the program, in the teaching and learning process? Are they an add-on where you do your degree and you do something else in addition? And how can these competencies be best accessed through the formal education process? Okay, can we move on? So at the same time, whilst we have graduate unemployment and underemployment, just about every country in the region talks about skill shortages, right? There's a problem in getting employees who possess the correct skills for industry. And these skills may include both soft skills, hard skills, technical skills, etc. And post-COVID, the skill shortage is profound. And what we're seeing is large flows of migrant workers. And for example, in Australia, the projection this year is through the various migrant visas which are available, that government is projecting 300 skilled migrants into the country to make up for the skill shortages. At the same time, as with every other country, we have graduate unemployment and underemployment. So there's this incongruity in the labour market. Some graduates can't get jobs. At the same time, employers are saying they lack skills. So to what extent is this a system problem, a university problem, a failure of the whole education system? Or is it maybe is it the employers going for easy solutions such as migration without maybe engaging in education institutions to ensure that there's a ready supply of skilled labour? Can we move on? So Manpower reported that 38% of employees in the region expressed their inability to fill key positions, either due to the quantity or quality of applicants, notably in skilled trades, sales, engineers, technicians, accounting, information technology, and management. Now, I think the other thing to say is that whilst there are skilled migration flows to the wealthier countries, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, this results in a brain drain. So countries such as Bangladesh and Thailand and Malaysia and Vietnam complain about basic skill shortages in, say, key areas such as education and medicine, engineering, etc., because a lot of their graduates are going to wealthier countries, the Middle East and Europe and and North America. And for example, in Nepal, there's an agreement in place that the UK will take most of the nursing graduates of Nepal to fill the nursing shortages in Britain. And of course, one of the problems facing Nepal is accessing skilled labour in both the health and education sectors. And these are key sectors for achieving sustainable development goals. Okay, can we move on? So there are these major quality and matching problems throughout the region. And I report on some of these statements across countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, Nepal, Vietnam. And there are problems where it appears that there may be there is supply of graduates, an excess supply of graduates in areas which don't match with the demand for graduates. So especially in maybe high skilled areas, manufacturing, construction, engineering, or because of immigration, there's a shortage of skilled labour, and because these are relatively poor countries, it's difficult to attract skilled immigrants into those countries. Okay, can we move on? Okay, so as I said, it's a recurring problem. On the one hand, we have graduate work readiness problems, or what I prefer to call the mismatch problem between the supply of graduates and the demand for graduates. And we have the claims across the region that the graduates are either don't have the degrees in the right areas, or they lack these range of skills and competencies which Doug talked about in his address. Can we move on? Okay, so I won't go into what are these necessary skills and these attributes. Doug's followed that. And I talked about some of the soft skills: working in teams, strategic thinking, reliability, teamwork, networking, writing and communications, IT skills, creativity, and the list goes on and on. It's almost endless. Can we move on? I guess the first thing is this exclusively a university responsibility? And are all these skills and attributes accessed through formal education? Are they the problem of universities? Do we need to look at the entire university system? When you look at the complaints of employers, they talk about communication and writing problems and numeracy problems. Well, aren't these the responsibility of base education, secondary education, etc.? And in one sense, tertiary education assumes that the graduates into universities have these basic skills. Universities themselves are being fairly active, especially, I guess, in Australia and the UK and the US, where you have competitive university systems. Employability is something you can advertise. And I've forgotten how many universities in Australia claim to be number one for graduate employability. It's more than one. It's probably more than a dozen. So this issue is being addressed through looking at how the attributes and competencies can be embodied into programs, how maybe universities can develop teaching and learning add-ons, how they can engage better with employers to provide maybe a seamless pathway from graduation to employment. And since extensive public funding of tertiary education is involved, governments are requiring universities to be perhaps more accountable in this through graduate attributes. Universities themselves are being active through various accreditation systems which are linked to employability and also the quality of their staff and their programs. And these are all assessed, and there's so many different metrics now operating for teaching and learning and research and systems and programs and degrees that I don't have to tell everyone here that you can spend most of your days filling out all the reports. Okay, can we move on? So future skills have to be anticipated, and the transition from education to employment is all about uncertainty, because investment in education is a long-term investment. From preschool to university is maybe 16, 17, 18 years. But the world of work, the demand for skills, the type of skills which are being required change on a daily basis through technology, globalization, competition, structural changes to the workforce, environmental changes, geopolitical changes. So technologically driven changes and globalization are making profoundly affecting the nature of work, how work's done, where we do work. And so the problem is that today's education quickly becomes depreciated. And whatever your degree you got this year, last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is increasingly less suited to what's happening in today's world. So it's important to think about lifelong learning and how institutions can maybe think beyond the degree and consider micro courses and add-ons to the degree program, such as through certificates, diplomas, etc. And this is happening. And maybe link these directly to work so that you can do these online, etc. through micro course programs where maybe the recipients can develop their own program, their own course, and maybe break down the silos of programs and degree structures which exist in universities. Anyway, can we move on? So maybe a whole of education problem. Can we put it down to the failure of institutions? In fact, when the right set of attributes will never be right because the attributes needed will always be changing. And these changes are recur, ongoing, dynamic, etc. So placing all the problems on the supply side misses what's happening on the demand side. And it's mainly a matter of maybe trying to support the transition process, to maybe look ahead to what universities can do to support not only their current graduates, but their past graduates, and maybe how to fill skill shortages through different forms of program delivery, which of course is possible through MOOCs, etc., and through offering short-term courses, etc., and upgrading degree qualifications. Can we move on? So skill development and matching as a problem right across Asia, and it's not only about selecting the right degrees for jobs, the right attributes and competencies for degrees, but maybe thinking about how those degrees can maintain their relevancy into the future and how you plan for meeting future job and skill demands. We move on. Okay, well, there's a few ideas which came from the book, and Doug mentioned many of these, but it's not only a university problem, it's also a government problem, it's an employer problem, and it's also linked to support from NGOs, community groups, and so forth. So there's an issue of maybe bringing together some more within institutional collaboration and collaboration between stakeholders, which Doug already mentioned. Can we move on? And there's stakeholder coordination, which is mentioned in some of the chapters in the book. So I'll move on as time's running out. We move on. So there'll always be a matching problem because labour demand is immediate and labour supply lags behind demand. It's exacerbated by the business cycle. So even if you have students in professional and accredited courses, if there's a downturn and major unemployment, that will not necessarily offer protection. And of course, there are major structural changes, technological developments, global warming, natural disasters, geopolitical events, and of course the pandemic. So university education will always be eroded through time, especially through technological change. And universities have to think about what the purpose of an education is. So in Australia, some of the programs which maybe are not vocationally linked, you can think about literature, mathematics, physics, creative arts, drama. These are attracting higher fees because the government thinks that these aren't the skills that are not needed within the workforce. But within those courses are embodied lots of important soft skills and maybe key skills. So trying to pick the programs which should be funded is wrought with a lot of problems. There's a lot of blame shifting, and it's easy to blame universities when there's graduate unemployment. And there's stakeholder problems around coordination and integration. And I guess employers generally complain about graduates, but they probably don't do enough to engage with universities and colleges of training. So I think overall there's an opportunity around graduate work readiness to rethink the university education model, what goes into what we're providing students, how we do it, and who we engage with, and for how long we do it. And as I said, my interest is really around how to improve the matching and to reduce the loss of the return from that important and substantive investment in education from communities, individuals, and nations. And this is what occurs when we have a graduate work readiness challenge and problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Burgess, for your stimulating and informative sharing on graduate work readiness. Professor Burgess, please stay for the following session. Now it's our great pleasure to invite back our Dean of HKMU LePace, Dr. Benjamin Chan, who will be leading a moderated discussion with our amazing keynote speakers, Dr. Doug Koh and Professor Burgess. I'm sure our participants are looking forward to the discussion and ideas exchanges and to learn more about how we can better support graduates of the future from the joint experiences. Dr. Chan, Dr. Koh, and Professor Burgess, please.
Hi, Doug. Hi, Professor Burgess. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm truly delighted to be facilitating this discussion against the backdrop of your wonderful presentation. While listening to your presentations, I was trying to find similarities and concerns and areas that would be of particular interest to our region and especially China. One of the things that Doug brought up, first of all, about employability as a concept. I noticed the similarity. For example, when I was sharing with my colleagues here in my university, I also said to everybody that this term is not something to be defined. It's actually open for discussion. It's a contestable concept wherein it's continually being redefined, but employability is definitely not about employment, not about short-term employment. So that's one thing that wherein we have a similar concern. The other thing is about this approach. If we want to instill the concept of employability into our faculty members and students, we need to adopt a whole of life approach. And it's not about short-term preparing students within the 3-year university system or 4-year university system to put them out into the market, to offer them to employers, and they may get jobs. And in fact, in the developed economies, the unemployment rate is terribly low right now, even though you have COVID, right? Isn't it? So to have employment opportunity is not a difficult thing for developed economies. So what is more important is how can they sustain their jobs and then derive satisfaction out of it and continually develop themselves. I think that is more important. So it's a matter of living through different career stages that is more important. And the third thing that arises from the presentation of Professor Burgess, he asked a very important question. Is it a university problem? Is it a university concern? I think, yes, indeed it is a university concern, because from most of the university's advertisement, you can definitely see that one of the outcomes is graduates being able to sustain, to get employment. In fact, one of the European university partners my school had is that it openly says that we are certain that our students can get employment because our education is regional economy and we have engaged with employers. So I think it's definitely a university concern. All universities want to have very good employment outcomes. But my first question is directed to Doug. So we know that students need to get something from us as university educators. How do you excite your colleagues in NTU or in other universities in the UK about the importance of doing work in this area, employability? I know you have a framework, which is wonderful, the NTU framework. How do you do it within your university? Can you share your experience with us?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Benjamin. I was listening again. Thank you, John. Lots of, I thought, similarities and synergies in what we were saying there, the overarching messages. How do we get our colleagues to engage? I think for me, what I've learned is the language is important. That's what I said, right? That was my message throughout. I think the language is important, how we engage colleagues, because there are certain colleagues in universities that are rightly so very research focused, and that's their focus and their role and their responsibility. And I completely understand that. So if I go in talking about job and skills to those colleagues, particularly, my experiences have been that's not always an easy conversation. That's what the Careers and Employability Service do. That's not what we do. That's not what higher education is for. And there's this kind of view and this separation. And my tactics are a little bit about stealth. How do we get these outcomes by stealth? And it's marketing. It's the words we use. So rather than talking about job skills and employment, I talk about learning. Because I would argue those academics who are focused on research, if I ask them, what do you believe a good student looks like? What do you believe a graduate looks like? They'll talk about independent thinkers, critical thinking, having those communication skills, being able to collaborate and work with others. Those are the same things I would argue that I want and the employers want, but we're using different words and we're using different terminology. So my success is that we're not doing it perfectly, but where I've achieved successes for me is about engaging with them in a language that resonates with that profession or that discipline. Like John made reference to those subjects that don't have direct roots into jobs, history or geography or some things like that. How do I engage those colleagues where there's not a direct route? And I think it is about talking about in the language of learning and teaching. It's about pedagogy. So the frameworks that I've developed over the years have all been based on this set of principles of these are a combination of things that are important here. So I think it's framing it in a way that engages people and not necessarily coming out with one particular outcome of that learning, which is just their job, which is going to change. So I don't know what yeah, if that makes sense.
And John, how about in your university? How do you heighten awareness about the concept of employability in your faculty members?
Well, I guess I've worked in quite a few universities over the years, and often you find that employability is much easier to embody into programs where there's professional certification and you have direct involvement of an industry, and students come out at the end and they're certified to be employed in that industry because they're able to demonstrate that they have the attributes. And for example, in education, there's usually a strong link between university education faculty and schools, etc., and the funding authorities. So there's a clear path there. And so that's one way you can do it, through certification and professional involvement. And that's a pretty seamless process. But as we said, not all programs are professional. And some programs are around maybe big ideas, critical thinking, maybe developing those attributes associated with citizenship and thinking big, etc. And maybe if you go outside of the narrow professions, it's maybe an issue of how you can embody not only the big issues, critical thinking big, with some sort of more mundane, professional attributes, etc. And I think quite a few universities are doing this through, looking out for mentoring, maybe short-term placements, etc. So the issue's there because governments, as I said, want to demonstrate that their investment in higher education is being effective. But I think it's back to the issue, what's the purpose of higher education? And is it immediate job matching? Well, generally it's other issues. And from those other issues, which are maybe not directly vocational, could come profound changes in the future. If you're looking at philosophy and physics and mathematics, etc. So they don't have an immediate currency, but they could have a long-term return.
Doug, would you like to supplement?
Yeah, I just want to come back on that. I agree with John. But for me, I think in those subjects which might not have that direct vocational path, I think there's an opportunity to make that depth of learning that those subjects are delivering more explicit. So what are those graduates from those subjects, history, geography, what other qualities do they bring? And I think that's one of the challenges that we often face, is that students don't recognize what the depth of what they're getting there. So I think so as educators, if we make that more explicit, they can recognize what they're gaining. So these are relatively quick wins and might not be about changing anything. It might be about surfacing these things so they recognize it, so they can talk about it in applications, they can talk about it, and they can also recognize maybe this type of job suits me, or maybe this type of job suits me. And so I think that's a really important kind of aspect. Psychology, for example, I mentioned that as an example, many of them will not become psychologists. So what is that course developing in them that will be of benefit in other professions? And if we don't expose them to those opportunities and let them explore and figure it out, then that's where there becomes then that employment issue down the road. And research, that was the other thing, was academics. John, you'll back me up here. I think talking to academics and having evidence behind you and research and published research, that also helps. Sorry, John, go on.
I think the other issue is maybe bringing down some of the barriers which exist within institutions. So, for example, there could be more integration between teaching and learning and what the education faculty has to offer, if they were embodied, had closer relationships with the art faculty. And when I worked in graduate business schools at various universities, we always had the issue that, engineers don't have any soft skills. They get jobs, but they're not very good managers, etc. Or, the scientists, they have good technical skills, but they don't have the soft skills. So maybe universities themselves would maybe reorganise the way they package their programs and degrees, and maybe break down some of the barriers. And again, I noticed when I was in the business school that, for postgraduate diplomas or an MBA, a lot of these working students were actually had technical degrees, and they were seeking, more soft skills, community skills, etc., management skills, etc., which weren't on offer in their first degrees.
Yes, and John's presentation brings out another very important dimension to the discussion about employability, which is one must not only look from within your own university system or local context, local economic context. Like, for example, in Hong Kong, when we these days talk about employability and students' career future, we have to bear in mind the economic integration with neighboring regions in China, which is the Greater Bay Area. So a lot of universities are thinking about sending their students for experiential learning in the Greater Bay Area. So in John's presentation a while ago, he was talking about the disparity of manpower supply across countries and the demographic trends, which is quite critical in the sense that you have large number of young populations in certain countries wherein they could be utilized to fulfill manpower needs in the developed economies, but which are not yet happening. And yet in the developed economies in this region and in other parts of the world, commonly we face aging population and declining economic growth prospect in the very near future. I'm thinking that, is it almost the time for the world to think about migration of human resources in a more liberal way? Because in the old days, it's about the movement of the movement of capital per se, investments, but not the movement of manpower supply. So here comes the opportunity to really think about the movement of manpower against the backdrop of economic integration. You have regional economic free trade agreements like the RCEP, which consists of 15 countries, ASEAN +3, and other things. So, well, my question is actually directed to Professor Burgess. Do you see this coming to us very soon? I mean, the integration of economic free trade areas and the realigning of manpower needs.
Well, it's already occurring. There are massive movements within ASEAN, and it's millions of workers, but it's both the skilled and unskilled. So if we look at, say, Australia, then a couple of 100,000 migrants per year on working visas, then a couple of 100,000 students. And so the migrants and the students will fill maybe low-paid jobs, etc., but they'll also maybe stay on and fill high-paid jobs. So there's this. It's quite an interesting process with the. I think you can see the movement of students and the movement of labour on a very large scale within ASEAN, which maybe exacerbates some of the problems around the skills shortages on the one hand, and the transition of graduates to jobs on the other. And so it's all related. And so, if we have a skill shortage, we don't necessarily in the short term think about ways to improve the matching from universities to employment, but the short-term solution is bring in more migrants who already have the skills and the training, and especially the experience. And of course, this leads to problems in the countries from which they come. So the wealthier countries benefit from the training and the experience which was acquired in the poorer countries, and they're left with a skills deficit, especially in key areas which are important for future sustainable development goals. When you think about teaching and health and infrastructure development, engineering. And so there is massive movement, not only to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, etc., but also to the Middle East. So it's it's a problem which is all interlinked.
So humanity faces problems that are quite similar, like sustainable development advanced by the United Nations, the SDG 17 goals. I know that there was a question a while ago directed to Doug. In your place, Doug, how are you factoring in the SDG goals into this entire employability debate?
I would say, I mean, I can only give a fairly surface level answer to that one, I'm afraid, because it's very important to us. We're one of the most kind of sustainability focused institutions in the UK, and we have specific teams of people working in that space. From my lens, where I'm sat, for me, I've become recently interested in a new group that's based out of Scandinavia, which is talking about inner development goals, which actually they were arguing are essential in order to deliver the SDGs. So in a similar way that I would argue, without compassion, without empathy, without emotional intelligence, without the ability to reflect on our behaviors and our actions, we're never going to change the planet or any other those other aspects that are contained and captured in the SDGs. So I think it comes back to that at the very simplistic level, focusing on learning that develops people that are recognize the importance of their actions and the sense of community, both local, and globally. And I think so. I think at the ground level, we're working on that. Would I say I'm specifically working on sustainability? No, but I am doing work that will be of benefit to support sustainability. So it comes back to that language thing again, and these divisions. And that's a challenge when you try to address these things in practice in the courses. Academics can't be we can't layer agenda on top of agenda on top of agenda with academics to say, how does your curriculum address personalization, sustainability, employability, well-being? It's too much. So that's for me where if we unpack the fundamentals that underpin each of those agendas, we're talking about the things we're talking about today. And so that for me is the future, this integrated approach to learning that actually is probably where higher education first started. Let's pretend that the first courses in higher education weren't to religion and medicine and that direct link to vocations. This isn't, the word might be new, but the principle of preparing people for the future isn't new in higher education, in my perspective. So that's how I think we're engaging with trying to, and there are lots of other aspects of work that Cassie probably would know more about in terms of trying to engage, and Carla. We do have an employability award that is linked to the sustainability agenda. So that's an extracurricular piece where students can reflect on what their actions and how they're engaging with the agenda too. So we do have specific examples like that too.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot from your presentation and the discussion. I'm sure the audience did so too. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen, Dr. Cole, and Professor Burgess. We have now come to the end of Forum 1. Thank you to all our speakers for bringing their expertise and experience around the world and engaging in such stimulating, constructive, and open exchanges. We've thoroughly enjoyed the discussion and learned a lot from everyone today. Thank you so much again for your generosity and kind support to make this a memorable event. On behalf of Hong Kong Metropolitan University, thank you all again for making time in your busy schedule to join us here today. We look forward to seeing all of you again in Forum 2, which will be held on 26th of April. We wish you all a pleasant day and evening. See you in April.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.